There's a strange detail hiding in plain sight. Some of the most beautiful buildings in America are also the oldest. Walk through cities like New York, Washington, D.C., or Chicago, and you'll notice something unsettling. The further back in time you go, the more grand the architecture becomes. Massive columns, hand-carved stone, ceilings that look like they belong in heaven. But today, glass boxes, steel rectangles, buildings that look like someone copy-pasted them. So what happened? Did architects suddenly forget how to design? Did we run out of creativity? Or did something else change? Because here's the twist. America didn't stop building grand buildings because it couldn't. It stopped because it wouldn't. If you love uncovering the forgotten stories of the past, this is where they come back to life. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It genuinely helps this channel grow and reach more people. And drop a comment telling me what era or mystery you want us to explore next. Let's rewind. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, America was in what many call the golden age of architecture. This was the era of Beaux-Arts, neoclassical, and Gothic revival design. Translation? Buildings weren't just built to function, they were built to impress. Banks looked like temples. Train stations looked like palaces. Even government buildings screamed, "We are important." And honestly, they weren't subtle about it. Columns everywhere, statues staring into your soul, marble so polished you could check your reflection before a job interview. It was less, "Welcome to the post office," and more, "Welcome to Mount Olympus." But here's where it gets interesting. These buildings weren't just about beauty. They were about power. Back then, America was still proving itself on the global stage. Europe had centuries of history, cathedrals, castles, monuments. America, still the new kid. So what did it do? It built big. It built bold. It built buildings that said, "Hey, Europe, we can do that too." And for a while, it worked. But then something shifted. And no, it wasn't just taste. It was money. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Those grand buildings, they were expensive. Not just a little pricey. We're talking this building could buy a small country expensive. Why? Because everything was done by hand. Stone carving, sculptures, decorative details. There was no shortcut. No Control-C, Control-V for columns. If you wanted a lion statue at the entrance, someone had to sit there and carve the lion from scratch. Imagine ordering that today. "Yeah, I'd like 2 lions, one on each side of the door." That's not architecture anymore. That's a luxury pet project. And then came industrialization. Now, this is where things start to change fast. New materials like steel and reinforced concrete entered the scene. And suddenly, buildings could go higher, faster, cheaper. Architects realized something. Wait, we don't need thick stone walls anymore? Hold on, we can just use steel frames and slap something on the outside? Game changer, but also a style changer. Because when you remove the need for heavy stone and handcrafted detail, you also remove the reason for ornament. And this led to a new philosophy, a radical one. Form follows function. In simple terms, if it doesn't need to be there, remove it. No extra carvings, no unnecessary decoration, no artistic flair. Basically, if a column isn't holding something up, it's getting fired. And just like that, architecture started going on a diet, a very aggressive one. Ornamentation became wasteful, decoration became unnecessary, beauty became optional. And if you think that sounds harsh, you're not wrong. One famous architect even compared decorative architecture to crime. Yes, crime. Imagine being arrested for adding too many details to a building. "Sir, step away from the marble. Hands where I can see them." But it wasn't just philosophy. There was another major factor: speed. America was growing fast. Cities were expanding, populations were rising, demand for buildings was exploding. And when you need to build a lot of buildings, you don't have time to carve angels into every corner. You build fast, you build efficient, you build practical. Which is how we ended up with the box.
Now, let's be fair. Modern buildings aren't bad. They're just different. They prioritize function over form, efficiency over elegance, budget over beauty. It's less, let's inspire people for 200 years, and more, let's finish this before the deadline. But here's a question most people don't ask. If grand buildings were so expensive, how did they afford them back then? Because it's not like people in the 1800s were casually throwing billions around, right? Well, that's where things get even more interesting, because funding, labor, and even public expectations were very different back then. And once you understand that, you'll start to see why these buildings didn't just disappear, they became impossible to justify today. And we haven't even talked about regulations, or politics, or the moment when beauty stopped being a priority altogether. So, how did they actually afford those grand buildings back then? Because if you tried to build something like that today, the cost alone would probably make investors disappear faster than free Wi-Fi in a tunnel. Well, the answer isn't just money, it's how the money was spent and what people expected in return.
Back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, many of these grand buildings were funded by government projects, wealthy industrialists, and long-term civic planning. Cities weren't just building for today, they were building for generations. A train station wasn't just a place to catch a train, it was a symbol of progress, a statement. That's why places like Grand Central Terminal look like a palace instead of, well, a bus stop with ambitions issues. But here's the key difference. Back then, labor was cheaper, a lot cheaper. And not just because of economics, but because of labor conditions that would never fly today. Workers often had fewer protections, lower wages, and longer hours. So those intricate carvings and massive stone structures, they were possible because thousands of workers spent years, sometimes decades, bringing them to life. Today, that same level of craftsmanship would cost an absolute fortune. We're talking budgets that would make even billionaires say, maybe let's just go with glass. And speaking of glass, let's talk about corporations. Because this is where architecture really starts to shift. As America moved deeper into the 20th century, corporations became the dominant force behind construction. And corporations don't think like artists, they think like accountants. Efficiency, cost, return on investment. If a decorative facade doesn't increase profit, it's gone. If a simpler design saves millions, it's chosen. And just like that, architecture became less about expression and more about optimization.
Now add one more layer to this. Regulations. Modern building codes are far stricter than they were 100 years ago. Safety standards, zoning laws, accessibility requirements. All of these are important, but they also add complexity and cost. For example, those massive stone buildings, many of them wouldn't even pass today's earthquake or safety codes without major modifications. So even if someone wanted to recreate them exactly, they'd have to redesign huge portions just to meet modern standards. And then there's time. Back then, a building could take years, sometimes decades to complete. Today, if a project takes too long, it risks losing funding, missing market demand, or becoming irrelevant. So developers push for speed, faster construction methods, prefabricated materials, simplified designs. Because in today's world, time isn't just money, it's everything. But there's another shift that's even subtler, and maybe the most important of all. Public taste. Yes, believe it or not, people's preferences changed. Modernism didn't just take over because it was cheaper, it became popular. Clean lines, minimalist design, no unnecessary decoration. For many, it represented progress, a break from the past, a future that felt new, efficient, and forward-thinking. But here's the irony. What once looked modern now looks kind of repetitive. Because when every building follows the same logic, efficiency, simplicity, cost-cutting, you end up with cities full of structures that feel identical. Glass, steel, rectangle, copy, paste, repeat. It's like architecture discovered a favorite outfit and never took it off. Meanwhile, those older buildings, they still stand out. They still draw attention, still attract tourists, still make people stop and stare. Because they weren't designed to blend in. They were designed to be remembered.
So when people ask, why don't we build like that anymore? The answer isn't simple. It's not just money. It's not just taste, it's not just technology, it's all of it combined. A perfect storm of rising costs, changing values, new materials, corporate priorities, government regulations, and a world that moves much faster than it used to. But here's the real question. Should we go back? Should we start building grand, detailed, beautiful structures again? Or is that era gone for good? Because in some places, something interesting is happening. A quiet return. Architects in cities are starting to rediscover what was lost, blending modern technology with classical beauty, trying to bring back that sense of wonder without sacrificing efficiency. So maybe, just maybe, the age of grand buildings isn't completely over. It's just waiting for a comeback. And the next time you walk past an old building with carved stone, towering columns, and details that seem impossible, take a second look, because you're not just looking at architecture. You're looking at a time when buildings weren't just built to work, they were built to last. If you enjoyed uncovering this hidden piece of history, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what we uncover next.